But also, kind of where we got to last week is a bit like that. I don't know if you were here last week. If you weren't, we talked about a really fun topic that everyone likes to talk about. Generational sin and family dysfunction. How good is that? Yeah, I know. And then we talked about identifying the sins of the past that you have inherited. Because here's a reality that you and I both know, is that sometimes the stuff we do, the dumb, stupid, evil things that we find ourselves doing, the words we find ourselves saying, actually take their lineage back to our dads and our dad's dad and our mum and our mum's mum, or our family story has been embedded into us in a way we never saw coming, and we spill it out into our life. And we thought it was all good. Because we had jobs, some kids and houses and mortgages, and every now and again, the weeds start coming out. I'm like, I thought we sorted this out. Turns out, it's still there. We're looking at this story from the perspective of a guy named Joseph. So Joseph is an ancient story found in the book of Genesis. And the story is about a lot of things, but one of the things it's about is about inherited family sin. About stuff being done dumb over and over again. So if you look at what happens to Joseph in the story, that's the same thing in just a different way of doing it that happened to his dad, that happened to his dad, that happened to his dad. That's what we've been looking at. And last week we tried to figure out what's going on for you. And if you want to find out how to identify some of that stuff, go back and look at that previous message. Here's a quick list of some of the things that kind of sin system dysfunctions create. So if in your childhood you had experience withholding of affection, it's common to see a strong bonding intimacy as an adult. If you had addiction in your childhood experience, it's common for secrecy to be part of your story. These aren't the menu, it's not how it always works, but it often works this way. And we looked at that last week. This week, now that you've done the identifying, and hats off to you if you did a bit of that work. Because it's not fun. I was talking to one person after the first message, and they said they talked about this at their Bible study group, their life group, last week. And I'm like, good on you. That's not an easy conversation to have. So if you've done the work or done a bit of identifying, credit where credit's due. But that's not where the story ends. We want to move from identifying to healing today and talking about some of the things that we can learn from the story of Joseph that will help us overcome the cycles that we have inherited. Cool? I'm not going to read the whole story, so if you really want to know it, you're going to have to read it for yourself. But I will summarize it into 4 boxes. There you go. Step 1. It's the story in Genesis. Joseph perseveres through hardship of slavery and prison. He gets sold by his brothers literally into slavery as a result of their family dysfunction. And in slavery, he works his butt off. And then it goes on again. So he ended in jail, not his fault. And even in jail, he just keeps on doing the right thing. Then, surprisingly, Joseph rises to prominence under Pharaoh and becomes second in charge of Egypt. No one saw that coming. Cop twist, right? Following that, and at that point, Joseph's probably like, I've sorted my life out now. Oh, at last, things are going to be okay. And then, Mum's at the door. She wasn't Mum, it was his brothers. He thought he'd put the turf down, the grass was looking schmick, everything was all good, and then family shows up. And that thing we thought we had moved past was back in his face again. And he had to deal with that, to confront the sins of the past. And at the end of the story, Joseph reconciles to his family, and his rulership in Egypt saves many lives. That's what happens. And what I want to do is put on these little magic spectacles that look at that and identify some key things that Joseph did during those 4 bits of his life story that I think God wants to use in your and my life today to transform our lives of brokenness into cycles of blessing. Starting at the top, slavery and prison. While Joseph was in slavery and again in prison, a thing that happened is that he just kept on doing the next thing in front of him. He kept on working. I've got a couple of Bible verses here. So with me in charge, this is Joseph. My master, that's his slave master, does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, my slave master has entrusted to me, Joseph's care. In other words, Joseph is saying that in his slavery role, he was doing such a good job that his slave master is like,
you can actually just look after my whole house. Yeah. You're pretty good at this. You did well. But that is about as good as it gets when it comes to slavery in the ancient world, being a household slave in charge of a master's home, and a wealthy master at that. Unfortunately, that doesn't go well. Is falsely accused of a crime, ends up in jail. And then he goes to jail, and the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. So he is in slavery, he's in charge of that. He's in prison, and then he's in charge of the prison. Which is a bit weird, but like, that's pretty good. The second part, while that's going on, is God's still there. Even in the slave pits, even in the prison. Here's what it says: from the time Potiphar, that's the guy who owned Joseph, put Joseph in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household. So look, God's not disappeared. And while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. What I want you to do in a moment, not right now, I'm just giving you forewarning. I'm going to get some of you to put your hand up. I'm saying that now because that'll freeing some of you out. But lots of us are going to do it, so it's going to be good. What I want you to do is think back to a time, probably this is for people who would call themselves Christians, if I'm honest, but maybe to a time in your life you felt really close to God. In a kind of fresh way, you knew about his power. In a fresh way, you experienced his grace and forgiveness. You felt seen by God in the way that you haven't always felt. It's not like an average Monday. It was a special day where you just really felt the joy of the Lord in a way that you never really felt before. If that has ever happened to you, if you've ever had a day or a moment where it's like just been a really close to God moment, can you just put your hand in the air? And keep your hand up if at that same moment life was pretty hard. What? You put your hands down. That's a powerful testimony, friends. I don't think a single person put their hand down, actually. Like, it was a one-for-one average. Every single time people have felt the closeness of God, they've been in prison or in slavery. That's what that's kind of saying. So I've got two quick things to say about that. This is a quote by Rachel Evans. She died at 37. Very provocative and excellent thinker. Like, just great. But she passed away. And this is a quote from her. She says, "Even here in the dark, God is busy making all things good." That's so true, isn't it? That in the moments of hardship, that is often when you see God really showing up. That's a quote from her book about church. She's struggling with church, but decided to keep on going. And so she's actually referencing the idea here that the gathering of believers is not always great, but God's here making things new ones, so we've got to keep going. But I also want to acknowledge that while probably 50% of you put your hand up, maybe even a little bit more, there's some people that you're not covered that, or maybe it was too far, your hand up, that's cool too. But that's okay. Because while we see that God is moving in the darkness, which is part of the story, there's also just a power in the mundane. But I want to acknowledge it's a brave thing to do if you are going through the work of trying to undo the sins of your past. There's a quote by John Locke Kramer: "The most of life is painfully ordinary, but faithfulness in the ordinary is what forms us." I want to say there is power in the plodding. And if you are confronting the demons of your past, if you just get through the next day, you are doing God's work, friends. When my son was born, profound disabilities, the week that happened, he was kind of minute by minute for us a bit. I don't know how big of the power to get through the next 25 years of my life. So let's not think about that. Let's reduce our horizon to the next hour, and we'll get through that hour. And then maybe tomorrow I can think through a morning, and then maybe into the week I can drink through half of a day and get through that, walk through that. And just, friends, if you are still moving forward inch by inch, you are doing God's work. If you are overcoming something just a centimetre at a time, there is power in the plodding. But then the family shows up. Joseph had been doing the right stuff, figuring it all out, thought he's probably overcome the grasp of nice and his brothers show up in Egypt. The thing that was happening at the time historically is that the famine that was in Egypt had spread further, and Joseph had risen to second in charge. And there would have been lots of seconds in charge, most likely, in terms of ancient Egyptian political hierarchies. You have the pharaoh at top, then you have another layer underneath called the viziers, and there's lots of them. They're kind of like ministers, like we have in our federal government. And Joseph would have been in charge of the food. That's what happened. You can read about how that happened later. Point being, neighbouring tribes and villages heard that Egypt still had food while no one else had food. And so Jacob, his dad, told his bros, go to Egypt, we need food, apparently they have some. None of them knew Joseph was still alive. They certainly didn't know he was in charge. And they show up looking for food. And Joseph is now second in charge, looking after the food, and he sees his brothers. And they don't recognise him, but he recognises them. And all those things he thought he had dealt with are not dealt with at all after all. So what happens? Well, first thing that happens is he cries a lot. Like a lot. If you read the whole passage, I've got a couple of little segments here. It says he turned away from them and began to weep. A little bit later, he sees them again, and then he hurries out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room, wept on. Look, I'm a pretty typical Aussie bloke. I'm not good at the crying thing. When I got married, one of my friends came up to me afterwards and said that at my own wedding, I was the Iceman. That was not a compliment in my opinion. I was supposed to try and look like romantic, but apparently I looked like ice. So I'd admit, look, as I've had children, I've become more of a sook, but back younger, certainly tears were not part of my life. I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong. I think we actually need to be allowed to emote. Here's Peter Scazzaro. He says, ignoring our emotions is turning our back on reality. Listening to our emotions ushers us into reality, and reality is where we meet God. Emotions are the language of the soul. They are the cry that gives the heart a voice. This one from Brené Brown. Feels like she's talking about me, to be honest. She says, our families and culture believed that the vulnerability that it takes to acknowledge pain was weakness, so we were taught anger, rage, and denial instead. I'm not so much in the anger, rage one, but denial. Yep, feel that. But what we know now is that when we deny our emotion, it owns us. When we own our emotion, we can rebuild or find our way through pain. Confronting the past is going to feel. I don't know how it will feel for you. It will feel. Something will come out. And it's 100% okay, turns out. It's okay to feel. And then Joseph reacts. And if you read the full story, he reacts in a pretty weird way. I would not recommend that you follow the Joseph method of forgiveness giving because it's a mess. You can read the full story for yourself, but here's just a few quotes from what happened. It says here, then Joseph remembered his dreams about his brothers, so he said to his brothers, he didn't reveal he was their brother yet. He said, you're spies, you've come to see where our land is unprotected. Moments later, it's all right, don't be afraid. Moments later, when portions were served up to them from Joseph's table, in other words, he fed them all, Benjamin, which was one of the brothers, he gave him 5 times as much as anyone else. Look what sort of weird game is he playing? This is the thing where favoritism destroyed a family, and now he's showing favoritism to Teston. That's going to go great. And later on, whoever is found to have it was a cup that Joseph deliberately hid inside someone's bag to try and make out one of them was a thief. And whoever is found will become my slave, who says to his brothers. What a mess. What a mess. Joseph was feeling a lot. And he was trying to forgive, but he found it really, really hard. Really, really hard. Because here's the reality. I think the greater the sin committed against you, the greater the challenge is to forgive. It's just really hard. And it's not a one-time deal. Because it keeps going up. I reckon Joseph probably had, it's all right, don't be afraid, thought he'd forgive them. Thought he'd done it. Moments later, actually, no, I still don't trust you.
And perhaps that's part of the problem. Part of the problem perhaps is that we sometimes think forgiveness and trust are the same things, but they're definitely not. We are called to forgive, but trust can only be won back slow. Oh, there's this lady whose name I can't pronounce. I'll have a crack. Kumla Gobodo Madigo Kizella. I'm so sorry. I butchered that. Wrote a book called A Human Being Died That Night. And that book is an account of her one-on-one conversations with a fellow named Eugene de Koch and the apartheid police colonel whose nickname was Prime Evil. He was sentenced to 212 years prison for multiple murders, kidnappings, and from prison expressed deep remorse at the things he had done. Deep remorse. And this lady caller was able to have conversations with him, and he expressed a willingness and a want to meet with the families of the people he had killed, to just say sorry and to acknowledge his wrongdoing, which he then got to do. And one of the widows said this: "I hope that when he sees our tears, he knows that they are not only tears for our husbands, but tears for him as well." And Paula says that she had to wrestle with this weird feeling that on the one hand, his remorse humanized him. And so she wanted to forgive and love. At the same time, he killed heaps of people. Carrying those two things together is not easy. And so what Paula did is she gave it a new word. She said, forgiveness just doesn't seem to be the right word in this situation. So she called it something new. She called it a reparative quest. Here's a quote from an article she wrote about the situation. She said, "It's a constant journey to repair and to heal. The reparative quest for me comes from a way of understanding the process of reckoning with the past that is not just a forgiving, because forgiving tends to suggest finality, but there's an end point. I've forgiven, I can move on. Whereas the notion of the reparative quest suggests this is a journey." I think the story of Joseph shows us that forgiveness comes in fits and starts. There are moments when it's there and we're like, oh, I've moved on. Other times it shows up again, you realise, actually, I've got to forgive again. And I've got to forgive again. Because it's not as easy as that. Furthermore, because often the person you're forgiving has done you harm, or maybe not even intentionally harmed you, but their way of coping has drifted into your life and you've not quite come to terms with that yet, I want to give you permission, in case no one's given you permission before, to guard your heart in that situation. That is a Bible concept, literally, from the Bible. Proverbs, above all else, guard your heart. Not above all else, open your heart to constant battering by people who've hurt you before. Doesn't say that. It doesn't even say as your third priority. It says above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And for those of you who are like me and loves a little bit of military history, Sun Tzu from The Art of War, the general who loses a battle makes but a few calculations beforehand. Guarding your heart is an active duty that requires thinking and preparation. I want to give you a couple of suggestions about ways you might be able to guard your heart when you have to confront or be around the people that you know are a part of the reason you can't pull it together. These are just suggestions. I think there's some gold here. Limit exposure. Reduce phone calls and visits if needed. You're allowed to do that. Redirect conversations and maybe even have them ready, so you don't have to think about the right words to say in the moment you're stressed. You already know what you're going to say. I don't want to discuss that topic. I have a friend at work named Mark, legend of a school leader, really great guy. I remember this moment, this was so powerful, where he was speaking to a year 12 student, and the year 12 student was being an absolute peanut. If you are in the school world, you know what I mean. If you're not, trust me, the kids can be really awful sometimes. And Mark was talking to this kid, and this kid was just being downright rude. This is what Mark said. I remember it because I was like, whoa. Mark said, "Mate, the way you're speaking to me right now is making me really angry.
And I need to walk away, or otherwise I'm going to do something that I will regret. And then he just walked off. He was like, whoa. No amount of detentions were able to accumulate together to do what changing that kid's head that day. That was powerful. Knowing that you're allowed to say stuff like that, helpful. It was helpful for me to see it in action. I've used that trick now. It's not a trick, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek. Set emotional boundaries, like say to yourself, this is their pain, not mine. They might be trying to project it onto me, not mine to carry. You can prepare exit strategies. One way I do this is if I know I've got to have a hard conversation, I deliberately plan a meeting straight after so they can't be in my office for more than half an hour. So at that time, knock, 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 I've got another thing I've got to go to. And that is not for their benefit, that's actually for mine. I need to get out of those situations sometimes. Prepare an exit strategy. Have grounding techniques ready, deep breathing, prayer, sensory focus. That means being aware of how your feelings are going. I've had kids in my office having complete anxiety attacks, and we just talk about what the light looks like on the wall and just focusing on that for a minute or two. It's weird how well that works. Literally just everything calms down. What can you hear right now? I can hear that teacher next door. Like that stuff. Walking, exercise, not doing it alone, considering therapy and support groups. That is all really good. And I can pretty much guarantee if you just do a bit of that, your life will be a bit better. Maybe even a lot better. And I apologise on behalf of the church if we've just said pray about it and it goes away. Because that's true. Prayer is good. Superpower. But prayer alone, God never asked that of anyone. God is all about doing the things you need to do. That said, it's still not quite enough. We do all this, and we keep applauding, because applauding is good, and we keep seeing that God is there in the dark moments. We keep doing that. We allow the emotions to run their course. We have strategies to preserve ourselves. I think that'll bring a lot. I just don't think it brings it all. I don't think it brings everything. I think it can heal a lot, but there's an element to the soul, I think, that gets so damaged by this that no amount of good action fixes it up. I think on a soul level, there is something in us that is broken that needs to be healed together. Joseph does heal. We learn that in Genesis 45. It's a beautiful little moment in the story. Here's what it says. It says, Joseph could no longer control himself. He wept so loudly the Egyptians heard him. He said to his brothers, I am Joseph. And then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And afterward, his brothers talked with him. But what helped? What got them there? What was the thing that caused this soul repair to finally take? I don't know if you know the story well enough to know what immediately preceded this. I thought I did, I didn't. I reread it this week and it struck me anew. So the thing that happened immediately before the soul work. The person who wrote the Bible, was Moses back in the day, whatever. Then it gets translated and they add the chapters in later. And when they put the chapters in, they thought that's the logical break. At 45 this happens and chapter 44 something else happens. I think they got the break wrong here. I think what happened at the end of 44 directly relates to what happens at the beginning of 45. They should have put the 45 a bit later. Because we missed the bit that led to the soul healing. So let's go back. Let's go back to the previous chapter. What happened immediately before? Here's what happened. Joseph said, that man, Benjamin, who was found to have my cup, he's going to be my slave. And the rest of you go back to your father in peace. And then Judah, his brother, went up to Joseph and said, pardon your servant, my lord, let me speak a word to you. Please, let your servant, me, Judah, remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy. And let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. What is the catalyst for final change. There's a theological phrase for it. It's called substitutionary atonement. It's the brother saying, take me instead. There is something powerful about self-sacrifice that changes the soul in no way anything else possibly can. And here's the thing about the Bible. If you're not a Bible person, you've never really worked out this is a key thing, but a key thing is that the stuff that happened in that first part of that book, like we call it the Old Testament, is constantly doing these little drops of grace pointing to Jesus. There's lots of little books to make one giant book called the Bible, and each of those books in their own way in the lead up directs the eyes to a greater Judah and a greater Joseph who is one day going to come and is going to sacrifice at a greater level than anyone ever has to heal your soul. So when it says that Judah said, take me instead, Joseph got to experience a little taste of what it's like to have to witness someone say, I will take the blame. And friends, we don't have to have a Judah to see that, because we see it actually in Jesus. Jesus is our Judah, who says, I see your pain. I see your dysfunction. I see how it has hurt you. I see how you wish you could stop, but you can't stop. Because there's stuff in you that got put in you that you didn't put in there, and you just keep putting it out, and you want it to stop, and you're doing all the things, but every now and again, in a moment of stress or frustration or tiredness or disappointment, it comes out again. And God says, I can see that you have no power over that in your own strength, so I will give my power to you instead. I will take it upon me, the death and destruction that you deserve. And I will instead put inside of you a new heart, a heart of flesh, a heart that actually can break the cycle of pain in your life. Joseph was healed because he encountered the grace of God on a micro level. I'm saying, friends, there's only one power in the world, I believe, that can fully overcome the hate and hurt that is stuck in your heart, and that is the power of Jesus. He will take away your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And here's what I know. Most of you here know this is true because you're here. Life has not defeated you yet. You are still here. Your story is like Joseph's story. Maybe you're still in the prison, but you are here. God called you here today to say he is not done with you yet. And whatever you are facing, he wants to say to you today, put it on me. Let it be crucified on the cross with me. And in return, I will give you a new heart. And you can heal in a way that you never thought you could. Your soul can be tied back together. And in a weird way, that tying, the brokenness that is healed, is actually a superpower. I don't know why. Sometimes I think, God, just give me like the super heart, the titanium heart, the Iron Man heart. And he's like, no, I want your broken heart. You're sewed together broken heart, because I can do a lot more with a broken heart than I could with a hardened heart. Joseph, in the end of Genesis, says a powerful verse, powerful phrase. He says, you intended to harm me. He's him speaking to his brothers, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph needed to lose the coat of many colours to assume the Pharaoh's robes. He couldn't have done it had he not done it that way. That was God's plan. He used the sin and the brokenness to achieve something greater. He can use the sin and brokenness of you and my friends to do something greater. I'm not going to share any of my own family's dysfunction. I don't have their permission to share it. But one little story. My father doesn't come from a Christian family. He grew up in New South Wales. But he just, for whatever reason, God's like, I'm not done with you, Bill, yet. And so he ensured that in his childhood, his next door neighbour was a Christian. And that dude and wife befriended my father and introduced him to Jesus. In his teenage years, he became a Christian. I gave him a Bible. He read the whole thing, which is just so typical of my father. When he read it, his intention was to underline all the dumb bits. That's what he'll tell you if you ask him, how did you become a Christian? I read the Bible, so I'm going to prove how dumb it was. And about halfway through, he became a Christian. And because of that, because someone introduced him to Jesus, he broke a cycle. And my family has a cycle of blessing because of it. That can be your story too. I think you need to tell your stories, friends. We just put our hands up before about people have a story, and like most of you have a story. Where God was there when everyone else said he shouldn't be. And not only was he there, that was like a peak moment of joy and safety for you. In the lowest of lows, you were closer to God than ever. We need to share that story more. In Psalms it says, we will not hide our stories from our descendants. We will tell them to the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. There's a quote from a lady named Robin Fifush. She says, all family stories are important. Everyday stories that are told in bits and clips, and the big family stories that are told and retold every family holiday as a performance. Stories about the good times and positive emotions help build a sense of shared history and emotional bonding, but stories of challenging times are equally important. Stories of going through difficult experiences help build a sense of resilience, of being together through tough times and making it through, of being strong because we are together. And your family story joins all of our family stories, and we are in this together.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. We really hope you enjoyed that. 2 quick things before we go, okay? 1, we'd love to connect with you. Go to our website, lifepoint.org.au, hit connect, and just give us your details. Someone from our church will be in contact with you. And the second thing is, if you live in the area, around the kind of Moreton Bay or North Brisbane, come along to a service, 8:30, 10 o'clock and 5 p.m. We'd absolutely love to see you here on a Sunday.